Chapter 1: The Digital Playground. The glow of the computer screen was the only light in Dylan's bedroom, casting a flickering blue hue over his teenage face. While his peers were out playing sports or obsessing over video games, Dylan was obsessed with logic. At 14, he didn't see lines of code, he saw pathways. He saw doors that people forgot to lock. It started small, cracking the school's grading portal to see a history test early. But the rush of being where he wasn't supposed to be was an intoxicant far more potent than any drug. He sat back, tapping a pen against his chin. He had just successfully bypassed a basic firewall for a local retail site. It wasn't about the money yet, it was about the million-dollar mindset he'd read about on underground forums. To Dylan, the world was divided into the sheep and the shepherds. The sheep followed the rules, paid their taxes, and trusted the systems built to protect them. The shepherds knew that those systems were nothing more than fragile glass. His parents thought he was doing homework. They praised his quiet nature and his focus. They didn't know that their son was currently staring at a database of 500 customer emails. He wasn't sure what to do with them yet, but he knew they had value. Information was the new currency, and Dylan was becoming a very wealthy young man in a world his parents couldn't even see. He navigated to a chat room, a dark corner of the web where aliases like 0 Day and Ghost traded secrets. He posted a simple message: entry achieved. Looking for the next step. Within seconds, a reply flashed. Don't just look at the door. Find the vault. Dylan smiled. He wasn't a kid in a bedroom anymore. He was a ghost in the machine. He felt a sense of freedom that no playground could ever provide. He was free to go anywhere, see anything, and take whatever he felt he was smart enough to grab. The web was spinning and he was right at the center. Chapter 2: The Coffee Shop Syndicate. By 17, Dylan's operations had outgrown his bedroom. He needed a crew, people he could trust, or at least people whose interests aligned with his greed. He found them in a group of childhood friends who shared his disdain for the 9-to-5 grind. They met at the Daily Grind, a bustling coffee shop downtown. It was the perfect cover. Loud, crowded, and most importantly, equipped with high-speed public Wi-Fi. The group consisted of 4 others. There was Jax, the smooth talker who could social engineer his way into a locked building. Leo, the hardware guy who could build a skimmer out of spare parts. And Sarah, a girl with a sharp mind for finances who saw the gaps in banking security. They sat at a corner table, lattes in hand, laptops open. To any observer, they were just college students cramming for midterms. In reality, they were mapping out their first coordinated hit. The public Wi-Fi here is a joke, Dylan whispered, his fingers flying across his keyboard. I've already sniffed 3 packets from that guy in the suit over there. He just logged into his corporate VPN without 2-factor. We need more than just one-off logins, Jax replied, leaning in. We need a stream. If we're going to hit the $1 million mark, we can't play small ball. Dylan nodded. He liked the ambition. They weren't just a group of friends anymore, they were a syndicate. They called themselves the Web. They began to rotate their meeting spots, different cafes, libraries, and hotel lobbies, anywhere with a strong signal and a lack of security oversight. Each location provided a fresh crop of unsuspecting victims. They were learning the rhythms of the city, the way people moved, and the way they bled data. The coffee shop was where the plan was solidified. They would target small businesses first, places like Raj's local convenience store, where the technology was old and the owners were trusting. It was the birth of a criminal enterprise, fueled by caffeine and a total lack of empathy. Chapter 3: Shadows in the Signal. The transition from hobbyist to professional criminal required a change in scenery. Dylan and his crew realized that staying in one place was a death sentence. They began to frequent The Hub, a series of high-end hotel lobbies and co-working spaces that offered premium Wi-Fi. These spots were gold mines. The people here had money, corporate credit cards, and a false sense of security provided by the expensive surroundings. Dylan sat in a plush leather chair in the lobby of the Grand Vista. He had a pineapple device, a specialized rogue access point, hidden in his backpack. To the devices in the room, his backpack looked like the hotel's official guest Wi-Fi. One by one, laptops and smartphones began to connect to him. I'm in, Leo whispered over their private encrypted chat. He was sitting 50 feet away monitoring the hardware. We've got 10 active sessions. 3 of them are banking apps. Dylan watched the data stream in. It was like fishing in a barrel. He saw usernames, passwords, and even the CVV codes of cards being used for online shopping. This was the raw material of their trade. They weren't just stealing money, they were stealing lives. They had names, addresses, and social security numbers. The $1 million mindset, was becoming a reality. Dylan felt a surge of power. He was an invisible force, a shadow in the signal that governed the modern world. He looked around the lobby at the businessmen in their tailored suits, completely unaware that their financial foundations were being eroded from a backpack 3 chairs away. "Don't get greedy yet," Sarah warned in the chat. "We harvest now, we burn later. If we hit them all at once, the banks will flag the location." Dylan ignored her for a moment, his eyes fixed on a specific account balance that had just popped up. It was a corporate account with a 6-figure limit. His heart hammered against his ribs. The greed, the dark hunger he had been cultivating began to grow. He wasn't just looking for $100 anymore. He wanted the whole vault. Chapter 4: The 6-figure threshold. The transition from harvesting to cashing out was the most dangerous part of the game. Dylan sat in a dimly lit apartment, the air smelling of stale energy drinks and hot electronics. On his screen, a digital dashboard displayed the fruits of their labor. Thousands of stolen credit card profiles, neatly categorized by zip code and limit. "We're crossing the line tonight," Dylan said, his voice cold. He wasn't the teenager in the bedroom anymore. He was a CEO of a shadow empire. He initiated a card-not-present blitz, using a botnet to make thousands of small, undetectable purchases across hundreds of e-commerce sites. The goal was to convert the stolen data into digital gift cards and cryptocurrency. By 3 a.m., the counter on his screen flickered and changed. $100,240. The room went silent. Jax let out a low whistle. 6 figures, D. We actually did it. We could stop right now, disappear, and nobody would ever find us. But Dylan didn't feel like stopping. The sight of the number didn't bring relief. It brought a frantic, pulsing need for more. The million-dollar mindset he had bragged about was no longer a goal, it was a ghost he was chasing. If he could make 100,000 in a few months, he could make 1,000,000 in a few weeks. Stop. Dylan turned, his eyes bloodshot and intense. We just proved the system is broken. Why would we stop when the door is wide open? We're doubling the botnet. I want the next 100,000 by the end of the month. He didn't see the faces of the people he was robbing. He only saw the digits. The greed had moved from his mind to his marrow. Chapter 5: The First Domino. While Dylan celebrated his milestone, the real-world consequences of his freedom were landing in the lap of Raj, the owner of a small, sun-bleached gas station on the edge of town. Raj was a man who measured his life in gallons and loaves of bread. He took pride in knowing his customers by name. "Something is wrong, Raj," a regular customer said, holding up a phone. "I got a notification for a $400 charge at some electronics store in another state. The only place I used this card yesterday was your pump." Raj felt a cold sinkhole open in his stomach. Over the next 3 days, a dozen more customers came in with the same story. His shop, the pillar of his family's future, was being flagged as a point of compromise. Unbeknownst to Raj, Leo had slipped a Bluetooth-enabled skimmer over the card reader at pump 4 weeks ago. It was a masterpiece of illicit engineering, thin, undetectable, and capable of beaming data directly to a laptop in a car parked across the street. Raj spent his nights staring at his bank statements and his security footage, seeing nothing but ghosts. His sales began to plummet as word spread. "I'm an honest man," he whispered to the empty aisles. But honesty was a currency Dylan's crew didn't trade in. To the syndicate, Raj wasn't a person. He was a node, a simple entry point in a much larger, darker web. Chapter 6: Maya's Discovery. Across the city, in the sterile high-security offices of Sentinel Cyber, Maya sat in front of a wall of monitors. As a lead cybersecurity analyst, she didn't see people or shops. She saw heat maps. Usually, the maps were a dull blue, representing the background noise of internet traffic. But lately, a specific sector of the city was pulsing a violent, angry red. "Look at this cluster," Maya muttered, pulling up a visualization of fraudulent transactions. "It's not random. The sophistication of these phishing emails, the way they mimic local banks, it's too perfect. This isn't a script, kiddie." She traced the digital breadcrumbs back to a series of IP addresses that bounced through various public Wi-Fi hotspots. She noticed a pattern: the Daily Grind, the Grand Vista Hotel, a library downtown. Whoever was doing this was mobile, disciplined, and incredibly greedy. Maya's phone buzzed. It was a notification from a local business forum. A small shop owner named Raj was pleading for help, describing a skimming operation that was destroying his reputation. Maya's eyes narrowed. She had spent years studying the web, but this felt personal. These weren't just data points, they were lives being unraveled. "You're getting arrogant," she whispered to the screen as if Dylan could hear her. She saw a spike in activity, another massive transfer of funds. Dylan had just hit $200,000, and in his celebration he had left a single, microscopic signature in the code of a malicious attachment. Maya captured it. The hunt had officially begun. Chapter 7. The Financial Fallout. The phone on Sarah's desk wouldn't stop ringing. As a senior financial advisor, she was used to helping clients plan for retirement or save for their children's college funds. But this week, the conversations were different. They were frantic, laced with the panic of people who had looked into their bank accounts and found nothing but zeros. "I don't understand, Sarah," one client sobbed over the line. "I got an email that looked exactly like it was from your office. It asked me to verify my login for the new portfolio update. 10 minutes later, my savings were cleared out." Sarah's hands shook as she hung up. She checked her own corporate email and saw it, a perfectly mirrored phishing attempt. The branding, the font, even the tone of the writing was a carbon copy of her firm's communication. This wasn't a generic scam, it was a targeted, surgical strike. She realized that her clients weren't just being robbed, they were being studied. Whoever was behind this had mapped out the financial relationships of the city's elite. Sarah knew she couldn't handle this through standard banking channels. She needed someone who spoke the language of the attackers. She picked up her phone and dialed a contact at Sentinel Cyber. "Maya. It's getting worse," Sarah said without greeting. "They're using my name now." Chapter 8. The National Syndicate. Dylan sat in the back of a blacked-out SUV, a mobile command center he had purchased with his clean crypto gains. The $200,000 mark had come and gone, and now he was looking at numbers that even he found dizzying. But with more money came more dangerous friends. He had been contacted on an encrypted relay by an entity known only as the Architect. The Architect represented a nationwide syndicate that didn't just play with credit cards, they moved data by the terabyte. They wanted Dylan's localized precision to help them launch a coordinated account takeover across 3 states. "They want a piece of the action," Jack said, looking over Dylan's shoulder. "If we link up with these guys, there's no turning back. We aren't just a crew at a coffee shop anymore. We're part of a machine." Dylan's ego was a roaring fire. He felt invincible. He had outsmarted the banks, outrun the local police, and built a fortune from thin air. "The machine is exactly what I want," Dylan replied, his eyes fixed on the map of target zones. "We've been fishing in ponds. It's time to go to the ocean." He authorized the merger, unaware that by expanding his footprint, he was creating a trail of digital wreckage that was finally large enough to be seen from space. Chapter 9. The Detective's Pattern. Detective Lucas of the Cybercrimes Division stared at a whiteboard covered in red string and printed screenshots. He had been a cop for 20 years, and he had seen the evolution of theft from the street corner to the server room. To him, Dylan wasn't a ghost, he was a predator, and every predator has a hunting ground. "Look at the timing," Lucas said to his partner, pointing at a map. The skimming at Raj's gas station happened exactly 2 hours after a massive Wi-Fi sniffing event at the coffee shop 3 blocks away. These kids, and I'm sure they're young, are treating the city like a buffet. Lucas had been receiving reports from Maya at Sentinel Cyber and Sarah at the financial firm. The pieces were starting to lock into place. He saw the shift from small-scale card cloning to high-level phishing and account takeovers. "They're getting greedy," Lucas noted, tapping a photo of a high-end sports car recently purchased with untraceable funds in the area. "And greed makes you loud. They think because they're behind a screen they're safe. But every time they connect to a tower, every time they buy a latte with a stolen card, they're leaving a footprint." He pulled his jacket off his chair. It was time to stop watching the screens and start hitting the pavement. He needed to find the hub where the web was being spun. Chapter 10. The Convergence. The meeting took place in a windowless briefing room at the precinct. Maya arrived first, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder like a quiver of arrows. Sarah followed, looking exhausted but determined, clutching a folder of victim testimonies. When Detective Lucas entered, the air in the room sharpened. For the first time, the 3 pillars of the defense, technology, finance, and the law, were in the same room. "I've traced the origin of the phishing emails," Maya began, projecting a complex network graph onto the wall. "The code has a specific handwriting. It's clean, arrogant, and uses a proprietary encryption method I've only seen in one other place, the skimming software found at Raj's station." Sarah opened her folder. "It's not just money they're taking. They're stealing identities to open lines of credit that won't be discovered for months. My clients are losing their homes because their credit scores are being nuked overnight." Lucas nodded, his face grim. We're dealing with a kid named Dylan. We don't have a face yet, but we have a lifestyle. High-end rentals, luxury cars paid for in Bitcoin, and a habit of frequenting spots with unsecured fiber optic lines. He thinks he's a ghost, but he's actually a beacon. We just need a way to force him to stay in one place long enough to pounce. Chapter 11. The bait is cast. The plan was a digital Trojan horse. Lucas and Maya decided to use Raj's struggling gas station as the center of the trap. They knew Dylan's crew liked to return to successful hunting grounds to refresh their hardware. We're going to give them something they can't resist, Maya explained. She had developed a honeypot credit card, a digital profile that looked like it belonged to a high-net-worth individual with an astronomical limit and no fraud alerts. We'll leak the data of this whale through a vulnerable port in Raj's new point-of-sale system. Raj was hesitant. You want me to let them back in? He asked, his voice trembling. We'll be right there with you, Raj, Lucas promised. We've installed hidden 4K cameras and a localized cellular jammer that we can trigger the moment they try to transmit the data. We aren't just catching a thief, we're cutting the web. Sarah worked the financial angle, ensuring the whale account looked legitimate to any secondary verification Dylan might run. They were creating a digital mirage, a shimmering oasis of wealth that would appeal directly to the greed that had already consumed Dylan's common sense. Chapter 12. The Silent Watch. The first 48 hours were agonizingly quiet. Maya sat in the back of a nondescript delivery van parked 2 blocks from Raj's, her eyes glued to the data streams. Lucas sat in the passenger seat, sipping lukewarm coffee, his ears tuned to the police band. Anything? Lucas asked for the 100th time. Quiet. Too quiet, Maya whispered. Wait, I have a handshake. Someone just pinged the router at the station. They're probing the honeypot. On the screen, a series of command lines scrolled by. Dylan was being cautious. He was shoulder surfing the network from a distance, checking for tripwires. Maya held her breath, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She had to let him in just enough to feel safe, but not enough to realize he was being monitored. He's taking the bait, she breathed. He's downloading the whale profile. And he's doing it from a localized MAC address. He's nearby, Lucas. He's within 500 feet. The hunt was no longer theoretical. The predator had stepped into the light, lured by the promise of a payday that would finally push him into the millions. But as Dylan reached for the prize, the jaws of the trap began to creak shut. Chapter 13. The Shadow Tail. Dylan sat in the back seat of the SUV, his eyes reflecting the rapid scroll of data on his tablet. He felt like a god. He had just intercepted a whale, a credit profile with a $500,000 limit and a history of luxury purchases. This was the score that would finally push his net worth into the stratosphere. The signal is coming from Raj's place again, Leo noted from the driver's seat. Seems like they upgraded their hardware. It's a cleaner feed than last time. It's a gift, Dylan muttered, his greed blinding him to the oddity of such a high-profile target appearing at a suburban gas station. Don't just skim it. I want a full mirror of the phone that authorized that transaction. If we get the device ID, we can bypass the 2-factor authentication. Unbeknownst to them, a gray sedan was trailing 3 cars behind. Inside, Detective Lucas watched the SUV's erratic movements. They weren't just staying in one spot. They were circling the block, war driving to map out every signal in the area. Lucas stayed back, using Maya's real-time GPS pings from the honeypot data to track them. The web was no longer just digital, it was a physical perimeter closing in on a black SUV. Chapter 14. Cracks in the syndicate. Pressure has a way of revealing the flaws in any structure. Inside Dylan's crew, the million-dollar mindset was starting to turn into paranoia. Jax, usually the smoothest of the group, was sweating. We've been in this neighborhood for 40 minutes, Jax warned, glancing at the side mirror. That gray sedan has turned every corner we have. We need to dump the hardware and ghost. You're losing your nerve, Jax, Dylan snapped, his fingers flying across the keys as he initiated the final transfer of the whale's funds. Another 5 minutes and we have enough to move to the Caribbean. You want to go back to making lattes at the coffee shop? Or do you want to be a king? Sarah, monitoring the financial side from a remote laptop, chimed in over the headset. The transfer is hanging, Dylan. The bank's gateway is responding, but the packets are delayed. Feels like the network is thick. Like someone is sniffing us. Dylan froze for a split second. The thickness Sarah described was the result of Maya's digital interference. A throttle designed to keep them connected to the signal for as long as possible. But Dylan's ego overrode his instinct. It's just a slow server. Push it through. I'm not leaving $500,000 on the table. Chapter 15. The Warehouse Graveyard. The SUV finally pulled away from Raj's neighborhood, heading toward an industrial district on the outskirts of the city. Lucas followed at a safe distance, signaling for backup. They arrived at a dilapidated warehouse, a graveyard for old shipping containers and rusted machinery. "This is it," Maya whispered over the radio from the van. "They're setting up a localized server. They aren't just stealing data anymore, they're printing. My sensors are picking up high-frequency signals consistent with card embossers and thermal printers." Inside the warehouse, Dylan and his crew were surrounded by the tools of a modern forgery lab. Dozens of blank plastic cards sat in neat stacks. Leo was calibrating a machine that could encode magnetic strips with the stolen whale data. This was the final stage, turning digital theft into physical currency that could be washed through casinos and high-end retail. "We're almost there," Dylan said, a manic grin spreading across his face. "Once these cards are live, we hit the city. We drain every ATM, we buy every Rolex, and we disappear." He felt the weight of the world's wealth within his reach. He didn't hear the silent footsteps of the tactical team surrounding the building. He didn't see the red dots of laser sights dancing across the crates behind him. He only saw the green progress bar on his screen, 99% complete. Chapter 16. The Breach. The 99% complete bar pulsed on Dylan's screen like a mechanical heart. The warehouse was silent, save for the hum of the card embossers and the frantic clicking of keys. Then the world exploded. The heavy steel doors of the warehouse were blown off their hinges with a deafening crack. "Police, hands in the air." Lucas's voice boomed over the chaos. Flashbangs ignited, filling the room with a blinding white light and a disorienting roar. Dylan dived behind a stack of shipping crates, his heart hammering against his ribs. The million-dollar mindset vanished in an instant, replaced by the primal instinct of a cornered animal. Through the smoke, he saw Leo being tackled to the ground and Jax frozen in the glare of a dozen tactical lights. "Kill the server." Dylan screamed, but it was too late. Maya had already executed a remote shutdown command through the back door she'd installed in the whale data. The screens went black. The digital empire Dylan had spent years building was being erased in seconds. He reached for his primary laptop, desperate to wipe the hard drive, but a heavy boot stepped on his hand. Chapter 17. Face to Face. Lucas stood over Dylan, his service weapon drawn but steady. Behind him, Maya stepped out from the shadows of the tactical team, her face illuminated by the blue and red strobes of the police cruisers outside. She wasn't just a voice on a headset anymore, she was the person who had outcoded him. "You're Dylan," Maya said, her voice remarkably calm amidst the shouting. "I've been reading your handwriting for months. You're talented, but you're sloppy. You let your greed create a pattern." Dylan looked up, his face streaked with sweat and dust. "I was free," he spat, his voice trembling. "I was doing what everyone else is too scared to do. I took what I wanted." "You didn't take from the system, Dylan," Maya countered, kneeling down to look him in the eye. "You took from Raj. You took from Sarah's clients. You took from people who worked 30 years for what you stole in 30 seconds. That's not freedom. That's just being a parasite." As Lucas pulled Dylan to his feet and ratcheted the zip ties around his wrists, Dylan looked around the warehouse. The stacks of counterfeit cards, the expensive SUVs, the high-end servers, it all looked like trash now. The web had finally caught its weaver. Chapter 18. The Takedown Totals. Back at the precinct, the scale of the operation began to emerge. It wasn't just a few kids in a coffee shop, it was a factory of fraud. Lucas watched as his team wheeled in crates of evidence. 5,000 blank credit cards, 12 skimming devices, and hard drives containing the personal information of over 50,000 individuals. "The architect is still out there," Lucas said, looking at the encrypted messages on Dylan's seized tablet. "But we've got the local cell. This is the biggest cyber bust in the state's history." Maya sat at a workstation helping the forensics team decrypt the files. "We've recovered the ledgers," she announced. Dylan didn't just have $200,000. He had shifted nearly $1.2 million into various mule accounts over the last year. "We flagged them all. The banks are already starting the reversal process." In the interrogation room, Sarah sat across from Jax. She didn't want a confession, she wanted to see the face of the person who had nearly ruined her clients' lives. Jax wouldn't look at her. The bravado of the coffee shop syndicate had evaporated, leaving behind a group of terrified young adults facing 20 years in federal prison. The million-dollar mindset had led them to a cold cell with a concrete floor. Chapter 19. The Plea for Mercy. Dylan sat in the interrogation room, the fluorescent lights buzzing like a swarm of angry hornets. Across from him, Detective Lucas flipped through a thick binder, the digital paper trail Maya had meticulously reconstructed. Dylan's hands were no longer flying across a keyboard, they were shackled to a metal ring on the table. "I can give you the architect," Dylan whispered, his voice cracking. The arrogance that had fueled his million-dollar mindset had been replaced by a desperate, hollow fear. "I know the routing nodes for the national syndicate. I know the dark web markets they use to wash the crypto." Lucas leaned back, his eyes cold. "We already have your servers, Dylan. Maya is cracking your encryption as we speak. You aren't the only genius in the room anymore." Dylan felt the walls closing in. He tried to explain that it was just a game, a way to prove his intelligence, but Lucas wasn't interested in the philosophy of a thief. Every time Dylan tried to justify his actions as freedom, Lucas countered with a photo of a victim. He showed him a picture of a grandmother who lost her life savings, and a photo of Raj standing in his empty gas station. The reality of his web was finally setting in, and it wasn't a digital playground, it was a prison. Chapter 20, Restoring the Name. Back at the gas station, the out-of-order signs were finally coming down. Maya and a team of cybersecurity volunteers had spent the weekend scrubbing Raj's systems and installing state-of-the-art encrypted terminals. They didn't just fix the tech, they held a community workshop in the parking lot to explain how the fraud had happened and how everyone was now protected. "It's going to take time, Raj," Sarah said, handing him a stack of letters from her firm. "But we've cleared the fraudulent charges from your customers' accounts. The banks have issued a formal apology for the delay." Raj looked at his hands, which were still stained with the grease of honest work. "I thought I lost everything," he said softly. "Not just the money but the trust. People looked at me like I was the one stealing from them." The community response was slow but steady. As word spread that the coffee shop syndicate had been dismantled, the regulars began to return. Raj realized that while Dylan had been chasing millions, the true value was in the $5 transaction from a neighbor who trusted him. The million-dollar mindset was a lie. The community mindset was what actually kept the world turning. Chapter 21, The Paper Trail Ends. The legal machinery moved with a cold, relentless efficiency. Sarah worked tirelessly with the federal prosecutors to ensure that every dollar recovered was earmarked for the victims. It was a logistical nightmare, moving funds back from offshore accounts and frozen crypto wallets, but she felt a sense of purpose she had never found in standard financial planning. "We've recovered about 80% of the physical losses," Sarah reported to Maya during a late-night session at the office. "The rest is lost to the ether of the blockchain. But for people like Raj, that 80% is the difference between survival and bankruptcy." Maya nodded, her eyes tired from scanning lines of code. She had discovered that Dylan's national syndicate wasn't nearly as organized as he thought. Without Dylan's localized precision, the architect's network was beginning to fray. By taking down the web in their city, they had caused a ripple effect that was shutting down fraud cells across 3 other states. They weren't just reacting anymore, they were on the offensive. Maya had developed a script that could detect the pineapple devices Dylan used in coffee shops, and she was sharing it for free with businesses nationwide. The shadows where Dylan used to hide were being flooded with light. Chapter 22, The Court of Public Record. The trial of Dylan and his associates became a landmark case in the fight against cybercrime. The courtroom was packed, not with hackers or tech enthusiasts, but with the people whose lives had been disrupted. Raj sat in the front row, his shoulders square. Sarah and Maya sat nearby, representing the technical and financial front lines. As the prosecution presented the evidence, the million-dollar mindset was laid bare for what it truly was: a series of cruel, calculated thefts. Maya testified as an expert witness, explaining to the jury how Dylan had manipulated public Wi-Fi and used social engineering to prey on the vulnerable. Dylan looked smaller in his suit than he ever had behind a screen. Without the glow of the monitor and the distance of the internet, he was just a young man who had traded his future for a momentary rush of power. When the guilty verdict was read on all counts, wire fraud, identity theft, and racketeering, there were no cheers. There was only a heavy sense of relief. The web had finally been dismantled by the very people it sought to ensnare. Chapter 23, The Sentence. The judge didn't hold back during the sentencing. "You spoke of freedom," the judge said, looking directly at Dylan. "But true freedom is the ability to walk through your community knowing you have added value to it, not subtracted from it. You used your gifts to build a cage for others, and now you will live in one yourself." Dylan was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, with a lifetime ban on unsupervised internet access upon his release. Jax and Leo received shorter sentences for their cooperation, but the damage to their reputations was permanent. As Dylan was led out of the courtroom, he caught Maya's eye. For a moment, the arrogance flickered one last time, but it was quickly extinguished by the cold reality of the handcuffs. He had wanted to be a legend in the digital underground. Instead, he was a cautionary tale in a legal textbook. The wealth he had obsessed over was gone, seized by the government to pay back the victims he had never bothered to meet. Chapter 24. The Aftermath. Life in the city began to return to a new kind of normal. Raj's gas station was thriving again, now known as one of the most secure spots in the neighborhood. He had even installed a community bulletin board where Maya posted weekly tips on how to avoid the latest scams. Sarah continued her work, but with a new specialty: helping victims of identity theft reclaim their lives. She and Maya formed a nonprofit dedicated to cybervigilance, teaching senior citizens and small business owners how to protect their digital footprints. They realized that technology was a tool that could be used for great good, provided there were people willing to stand guard against those who would weaponize it. Detective Lucas, now a commander of the expanded cybercrimes task force, kept a framed photo of the warehouse raid in his office. It served as a reminder that while the methods of crime might change, the motivation, greed, remained the same. He knew there would be another Dylan eventually, but he also knew that the team they had built was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 25. The Constant Vigil. The scammer's web concluded not with a sense of finality, but with a call to action. In the final chapter of this saga, Maya sat at the daily grind, the very coffee shop where it all began. The Wi-Fi was now encrypted, and a sign on the wall warned customers about the dangers of unsecured connections. She watched a teenager open a laptop at a nearby table. For a second she felt a pang of suspicion, but then she saw him pull up a coding tutorial for building an app that tracked environmental changes. The world was full of Dylans, yes, but it was also full of people who wanted to build rather than break. The million-dollar mindset had been exposed as a hollow pursuit, while the vigilant mindset had saved a community. As Maya closed her own laptop and walked out into the sunlight, she knew that the web of human connection, built on trust, empathy, and shared responsibility, would always be stronger than any web a scammer could spin.